There are some things I'm not going to debate people about. One of them is whether Michael Jordan is better than LeBron James. For me, that's not really up for debate. It's Mike all day. Second, and most important, I will not entertain any counter argument to the fact that Black people have and continue to suffer abuses at the hands of law enforcement. To deny it is to deny reality. I believe the greatest crisis facing our country today is a continuation of racial injustice being perpetuated on Black citizens by the police. Treating one segment of our population unjustly just because they look different is not okay. But that's the way it is. And if you don't believe me, here are some of the shocking statistics about how Black people are treated and the treatment they receive at the hands of law enforcement. On average, the police shoot and kill 1,000 people a year. Since 2015, over 8,640 people have been shot and killed by the police. Black people disproportionately make up those that are killed by the police. Although Black citizens account for 14% of the population, Black people are killed by the police at a rate that is more than twice that of white Americans. It was the police that killed Breonna Taylor as she slept in her bed. It was the police that shot Laquan McDonald 16 times. It was the police that shot and killed Michael Brown, even though he was unarmed. It was the police that severed Freddie Gray's spinal cord and choked Eric Garner to death. The police killed Ayanna Stanley Jones, a 7-year-old Black girl, as she was in her father's home while they were looking for drugs. The police shot Walter Scott as he ran away in North Carolina. These actions were taken by the police. But it doesn't stop there. Over the last decade, cities around the country have spent over $3 billion to compensate over 40,000 victims of police brutality and misconduct, with the vast majority of those victims being Black people. Chicago by itself has spent close to $1 billion on police brutality and misconduct lawsuits. And every year, that amount keeps growing and very little changes. A young Black man has a greater chance of being shot by the police than he does of winning the lottery. That means if you're a young Black man, you won't win the Powerball, but you very well might get shot by the police. Black people are incarcerated in state prisons at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans. And did you know that 1 in 81 Black adults is serving time in prison right now? Actually, in Wisconsin, it's worse. It's 1 in 36 Black adults that's in prison. Did you know that in 12 states, more than half of the prison population is Black? Illinois is one of those states. And that's despite the fact that Black people are only 14% of the population. As they say, but wait, there's more. Over the last 35 years, more than 3,000 people have been exonerated from prison for crimes they didn't commit. And over half of them have been Black people. Black people have lost close to 18,000 years of their lives sitting in prison for crimes they didn't commit. And more are being exonerated every day. During the last 3 years, over 130 Black people in Illinois have been exonerated for crimes they did not commit, with practically all of them having been sent to prison by the Chicago Police Department. I don't know about you, but that angers me. This is not okay. Those Black people who were wrongfully convicted could have just as easily been me or someone in my family. It could be you. Actually, it might be you. Most police officers are good, hard-working middle-class people, but injustice against Black people is not about individual officers. It's not about a few bad apples. It's about the institution of policing. The problem here is the U.S. justice system itself. Cops are hunting and humiliating Black people not because they want to, but because that is what they're paid to do. Every single objective of the U.S. justice system is to investigate, arrest, and incarcerate Black people. And if you don't believe me, go to your local courthouse and watch the steady stream of Black people that go in and out of the machinery of the justice system. You'll see that the vast majority of cases that will be heard will involve a Black person. I get calls every day from people who've been harassed and targeted by the police for no other reason than they're Black. People who've been pulled over, taken out of their car and handcuffed for no reason, thrown to the ground and beaten in front of their family and friends for no reason other than they're Black. And when you study the statistics in Chicago, it's not surprising that I get these calls. In 2022, CPD arrested over 40,000 people. Black people make up 70% of those arrested. When you add Hispanic Chicagoans to the mix, together they account for over 90% of all arrests made in Chicago. And the same is true for the use of force. 76% of the time that force is used by a Chicago police officer, it's against a Black person. Time and time again, police departments have been found to have engaged in unconstitutional policing that violates the rights of Black people. In New York, a federal judge ruled that the New York police used stop and frisk as a policy of indirect racial profiling, as it increased the number of stops in minority communities. After the death of Freddie Gray in the Baltimore Police Department's custody, the Department of Justice opened an investigation into its police department and found that the Baltimore police discriminated against Black communities and targeted them for police harassment. The DOJ found the same when it investigated the Chicago Police Department in the aftermath of the Laquan McDonald police shooting. The DOJ found that the city of Chicago's police department had unconstitutional policing that fell heaviest on Black and Hispanic communities, and that the CPD were 10 times more likely to use force on a Black person than a white person. Similar DOJ investigations have found the same in police departments in Ferguson, Missouri, Cleveland, Ohio, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. If the police patrol white communities the way they patrol Black communities, we would have a problem in this country. If the same level of violence used on Black boys and girls were used on white boys and girls, there would be a revolution. Imagine what would happen if a 12-year-old white boy was shot and killed by the police at a playground in his neighborhood as he played with a toy gun like Tamir Rice was when he was gunned down by the Cleveland police. What do you think will happen? What if a white woman was shot and killed as she slept in her bed like Breonna Taylor was? What if a Second Amendment loving, law-abiding white man who had a license to carry a weapon was shot and killed in the front seat of his car like Philando Castile was? What would happen? I'll tell you what would happen. There would be an uprising. This country would not tolerate such state-sanctioned violence against white citizens at the hands of the police. It simply would not stand. So how do we get here? Well, the institution of policing is rooted in slavery. And because of that, there has never been for 1 second in the history of this country where there's been peace and calm between Black people and the police. The first law enforcement officers were slave patrollers who were tasked with capturing runaway enslaved Africans and returning them to their masters. There was no peace after the Civil War and during Reconstruction, when slave patrols were replaced by militia-style groups who were allowed to enforce laws known as Black codes that made it illegal for Black people to be unemployed. And if they were found to be, they were arrested and sold back into a new form of slavery known as convict leasing. It was slavery by another name. There was no peace during Jim Crow and segregation, when violence was used against Black people. It was the main tool they used for enforcement. And there certainly has not been peace since the war on drugs was launched on Black people beginning in the 1970s. This war has sent millions of Black people to prison and emptied our communities of its intellectual capital over the last 50 years. There has never been peace. For over 300 years now, racist policing has been a constant for Black people. And because of this, nothing causes more outrage amongst Black people than when they feel that the police are continuing to harass and attack them. The institution of policing is built on a foundation that was designed to target Black people. The reason we see so much injustice in policing against Black people is because this is how it was designed to be. And the reason why we rarely see cops being arrested and prosecuted is because it's hard to prosecute someone for doing their job. That's also why it's so difficult to fix the issues of accountability, excessive force, and racial profiling. You can't fix something that is working as designed. The criminal justice system must be fed a steady diet of Black bodies in order to survive. The entire justice system is all about controlling Black people, dragging as many Black people into its clutches as possible. And the government uses the police to control Black people, and they do it by any means necessary, by excessive force, by stop and frisk, by mass incarceration. These are the things that we hate most about the justice system and policing, and they were all created for Black people. The things we see in the news today that spark outrage, they're not new. They're actually old and rehearsed injustices against Black people. It's just an evolution and continuation of what has always been. The world was outraged when it saw George Floyd murdered in the middle of the street. It amounted to a public lynching. But between 1877 and 1950, over 4,000 Black people were publicly lynched in this country, many of them with the consent and participation of the police. The murder of Breonna Taylor highlighted police violence against Black women. But the truth is that Black women have always been the victims of extreme police violence. In 1959, a Black woman named Jessie Mae Robinson and 50 other Black women were arrested by the Chicago police after a raid on a party. They were beaten, jailed, and hospitalized. Black people are constantly targeted by the police under policies like broken windows and stop and frisk, which make it a crime to be Black and in public. But stop and frisk is not new. It's actually a very old policing tactic. It's a practice that dates back to the 1930s, when the police would routinely stop black people for suspicious behavior like driving a nice car, or being on the street, or being seen in a white neighborhood with a white woman. Just like today, the police would stop black people and ask them for their ID, and ask them what they're doing and where they're going. Police violence against black people is not new. Police violence against black children is not new. Michael Brown was unarmed when he was shot and killed by the police in Ferguson, Missouri. But so was Clifford Glover, a 10-year-old black boy who was shot and killed when he and his stepfather were stopped by the police in Queens, New York in 1973. Earlier, I said that black people are wrongfully convicted at rates higher than white people, but that's also not new. Black people have never received fair treatment in the justice system. In 1944, George Stinney Jr. was a 14-year-old black child when he was falsely arrested by the police and prosecuted and sentenced to death for the murder of white children. His trial lasted 1 day and he was sentenced to die by electrocution. It wasn't until 2014, 70 years later, that the state of South Carolina finally admitted that George was wrongfully prosecuted. Throughout the history of the United States, the justice system has continued to progress and evolve to keep black people down and entangled. Slavery transitioned into the old Jim Crow, and the old Jim Crow transitioned into the new Jim Crow that we live under today. And this country continues to use the police to accomplish this goal. Now, if you're thinking, well, don't black people commit more crimes? Isn't that why the police are in their neighborhoods? The answer to that question is both yes and no. Black people do commit violent crimes that require police presence, but not all crimes in black communities are violent. The majority of the crimes that black people get arrested for are misdemeanors like marijuana possession or traffic violations. Arrests are high amongst black people not because people are calling 911, but because the police are targeting and hunting black people for arrests. A study revealed in New York City that most arrests occurred on Wednesday. Now, I know you're thinking that sounds kind of odd, right? Well, it wasn't because black people were committing more crimes on Wednesday. It was because Wednesday was just the day that most police officers were at work. The criminal justice system wants black bodies, and it sends the police to enact this policy and to gather as many black people as possible. This is the major driver of police injustice against black people. The fact that black people are targets of police action is the reason for our overrepresentation in the justice system. Arresting and targeting black people is the order of the day in many cities. In his book Chokehold, law professor Paul Butler uses Ferguson, Missouri to highlight this point. After Michael Brown was killed by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, there were many investigations into his police department and his race and police practices. Now, Ferguson is a city of about 21,000 people. In 1 year, police officers sought 33,000 arrest warrants. That means that Ferguson had more crimes than it had citizens. But Ferguson is not a very dangerous place, and most of the warrants were for things like not paying a parking ticket or having an uncut lawn. One man was arrested for making a false declaration on a report because he told the police his name was Mike instead of Michael. Another black woman was arrested because she called the police to her home after her boyfriend beat her up. When the police arrived and didn't find him, they arrested her because they discovered his name was not on the permit to live there. These are the type of crimes that are driving black people into the criminal justice system. Ferguson is America. All across this country, you will see the same thing happening. Black people being dragged into the criminal justice system for minor offenses. And these are also the drivers of police violence against black people. Sandra Bland died in police custody after she was stopped for a minor traffic violation. George Floyd was killed after he was accused of using a fake $20 bill. Eric Garner was choked to death after he sold loose cigarettes. Michael Brown was stopped after he was accused of taking a pack of cigarettes. Walter Scott was shot in the back as he ran away from the police after being stopped for having a broken tail light. Philando Castile was killed after being pulled over by the police and he committed no crimes. Marlene Pinnock was beaten by the police in Los Angeles after she was caught walking on a highway. Freddie Gray had done nothing wrong before he was arrested and died in police custody. I could go on. The list is endless. This abuse is not only physically hurting black people, it's also harming communities emotionally. Police brutality and misconduct is a stain on the fabric of our society. It erodes public trust in our institutions and diminishes the rule of law. But what it does most is it robs people of their dignity. What my clients are all victims of police brutality remember the most about what happened to them, and what they still carry, is the shame they felt, the humiliation they suffered. They remember how it felt sitting in jail for a crime they didn't commit. They remember the anger they had watching the police lie in court. They remember the helplessness they felt, knowing that their family was struggling as they sat in jail and there was nothing they could do. They remember the crippling shame they felt seeing their child watch as the police brutalized them and hauled them off to jail. While the bruises and the broken bones eventually heal, the emotional toll that police brutality takes on a person is not something you get over very easily. It is especially difficult when you know that the person is still a police officer and your government is protecting them. It pains you to know that what they did to you will be done to someone else. This is the emotional toll of police abuse. Justice should not be solely black. Justice should be fair. Justice should be equitable. And until we get serious about these issues, we will continue to see millions of black people suffer, just like millions of black people already have.